Hello, I just want to talk about the first chapter in this Operations Planning and Control class, TEDT 3700. I'm going to start with the first chapter. The first chapter talking about the definition of operations management. I'm going to briefly talk about this chapter. I'm not going to use slides. I did posted slides on D2L so you could read it by yourself, but I'm going to highlight few aspects that you need to focus on. First of all, the definition of operations management. Operations management is the management of the process for making a product or providing a service. So look into the big picture of providing a service or making a product and look into all the details behind that. You start from a supplier with buying a raw material, and then you transform this raw material into an output, which is a product, and then you send the product to the customer. So look into all the aspects: buying, selecting a supplier, facilitating the process, moving the process from one station to another, packaging, look into the taking care of the customers. All this is related to operations management and many others. There are so many aspects of operations management, so you need to consider all other aspects of operations management. Before we start with another concept, I just want to talk about the difference between products or goods and services. Goods is something that you can't touch it. It's a tangible. The service is something intangible or act of service. You're acting. This is something where the customers value. So if you're providing a service, that means something that is valuable to the customer, but they can't touch it. An example of this, the education that you're taking now in my class, it's a service. Buying a laptop, this is a product. This is goods. So this is the difference. There are so many differences in the services and products in terms of communicating with customers. You will be communicating, you will be contacting customers with the service industry more than the manufacturing industry. Another concept that I would like to talk about it's the duties of the operations manager. The operations manager has to match the supply and the demand. We don't need to have more supply than the demand, because if you do have more raw material than what you need to make, then this is going to be wasteful and this is going to be costly. You're going to eventually not going to use this raw material. If you have more demand more than the supply, that will end up by losing some customers. Customer would be unsatisfied and dissatisfaction of customers. So we need to, as operations manager, you have to work with the sales and marketing in order to match the demand with the supply. One other aspect why operations management is important. Operations management is really important because it has an overlap with other functions in any organizations. Before we talk about the overlap, we need to talk about the three functions in any organization. These are the marketing, number one. These are the guys who market your products. Operations, these are the people who are making your products or providing a service for the customers. And the third function would be the finance. These are the guys who are making the calculation for you and figuring out, are you making money by the end of the year or not. Some of the overlap between these functions and the operations, as I mentioned, you probably want to talk to marketing in order to forecast and predict the demand. And this is one example of the overlap between operations and management. Sometimes you need to talk to them in order to satisfy the need, in order to satisfy the demand. Also, the marketing people who they're talking to the customers. They know what the customer wants. So probably you, as operations managers, you need to talk to the customers in order to satisfy their needs. In any operations management, there is a transformation process, which is basically converting raw material into products through a conversion process. So you bring the raw material into your company. You add some conversion process, like for example, wood material. If you have a wood and you're making a table, you're cutting the wood and you finish the wood. You finish it. You paint it. You sand it. and then at the end you package it and you send it to the customer as a table. The customer wants the table. So this is basically what's a transformation process, starting from a raw material all the way to the end product where you send it to the customer. And there's a really important loop here, which is the feedback loop or the control loop. You need to understand what did you do good, not in your perspective, in other people's perspective. And therefore you have to listen to your customers, you have to listen to your employees, and from there, after receiving the feedback, you will look into what you could do better in the future. And this is where you have to implement it in your process to improve your process, to reduce the variability. Variability is another concept in operations that you have to deal with it, and there are four major sources of variation. Variation is not good in your process. Therefore, you have to eliminate any variation. So let's start with the first type. The first type is variety in products. If you have so many flavors in your factory, so many flavors of your chocolate factory, so you have to have a variation in the production process. So more product or more variation in your products, that means more variation in the production itself. Variation in the demand. This is something that based on the market. Sometimes you sell 1,000 units, sometimes you sell 2,000 units. So it depends on the month. If you have a seasonal products, you will sell, for example, if you have winter gloves or winter coats, you will sell more coats in the winter versus the summer. So what you need to do, you need to forecast and predict the demand in order to match it with the supply. Random variation, this is natural variation. This is no control over it. This is coming from the process. There are so many examples of this. An example of this is just moving one item from one machine to another, the walking distance from one station to another. This is natural. You have no control over it. Sometimes you could change it, but most likely you're not going to be able to change it. And the last variation process is assignable, which is due to a reason. There is a specific reason that made this variation, and then this is what you have to look into, and you have to correct it and eliminate it. This is where, as an operations manager, you have to really give it a big concern, a big of your time, most of your time going to be focusing on looking into variation in your process and eliminating this in order to improve the quality and reduce the cost. So this is basically what I talked to you about it. It's some of the things that as operations managers has to do. Other than this, could be scheduling. We will look into scheduling in this course. We will be talking about inventory management. Some of operations managers, they will have to look into inventory management as well. There are a big concern these days in the United States about the trends in manufacturing. We see a decrease in manufacturing and increase in the service, and there are so many reasons, and I don't want to talk about it in this class, but there are so many reasons for this trend. One of the reasons is the low cost of labor overseas, and where you see most of the companies are going overseas to produce their products, and now here in the U.S. they're most likely they're going into the service direction and being a service company. We could talk about it more later on. And this is basically what I have for you guys about chapter 1. I basically touched on most of the concepts in this chapter. There are some slides that I would like to leave it with you. So read the slides, and if you watch this video, if you have any question, please feel free to talk to me, send me an email. Thank you guys, and I hope you will benefit from this video.